as more ingredients we should watch out for, and how significant this antibiotic issue is in the meat.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I certainly agree with that and echo that. Lots of data behind it. My grandmother used to tell me that you are what you eat, and so I agree with that. But we need to take it a step further. We are not only what we eat, but what we eat has eaten or been exposed to. So this goes for plant and animal. So we've talked a little bit about food with respect to trying to avoid pesticides, because pesticides are like the antibiotics for plants. So when you grow crops and you spray the heck out of them with pesticides, those crops will carry that pesticide-laden material, those chemicals, with them to your digestive tract. Even if you wash them, even if it really takes, there's studies that look at basically how long you have to rinse and wash and with what type of water and all this kind of stuff. It takes a lot to get rid of the pesticides that are used for crops. Like you
I
mentioned
was
earlier, you
told,
want to,
just to interrupt, Doc, I was
yeah,
told that if
yeah.
you put a vinegar on this, it might help. Is that true? Have you heard of that or no?
I've heard that. I haven't seen good data behind that. Vinegar is helpful in a lot of ways. A lot of
Okay.
people are advocating now that for blood sugar balance, that you start a meal with a little bit of apple cider vinegar. And I would
Mhm.
say that's totally fine. Just drink it from a straw, because that stuff will eat up your teeth. It's not great for the enamel of your teeth. So a lot of people are going crazy over apple cider vinegar, which I think is fine, but just don't like chug it, like it'll literally affect your teeth adversely. So you want to drink it through a straw. If you want to have a couple tablespoons before every meal, I'm okay with that. In fact, there's a lot of data suggesting that it'll help you not spike your blood sugar so highly. And so it'll be less likely to cause you prediabetes, diabetes, obesity, things like that. But let's go back to the topic of antibiotics and pesticides. So
Sure.
pesticides are to your vegetables and fruits as antibiotics are in the other meats, whether it be poultry, whether it be beef, whatever it is. If they're exposed to antibiotics, they will have evidence of that in their protein, in their meat that you eat. And so you effectively are being exposed to those antibiotics as well, which will adversely affect you in a couple of different ways. One of them is that they affect the microbiota, those living organisms, the bacteria that live in our gut. And so what's interesting is they've actually looked at this as antibiotic rich, whether it be meat or whether it be milk products that are using growth hormone antibiotics, whatever, they actually are what they call obesogenic. In other words, they are more likely to cause you to become overweight. And this kind of makes sense, right? Because when they feed the, let's say, cow, for example, antibiotics, it actually fattens them up, right? It's actually obesogenic to the cow. So they do it for two reasons. One, they do it to fatten them up because if they, are fatter, they weigh more, they generate a higher price in the market. But also, if these animals are confined to really small areas, which I think is pathetic. I think we have to do better. And I do not agree with it. I do not agree with the way that these animals are often treated in what are called the CAFOs, or the confined animal feeding operations. But the other thing they give them antibiotics for, besides the fatten them up, is just so they don't get sick being in those close quarters that they're literally on top of each other. And I've seen this driving through the fields in the mid center of California, where they have all these cattle literally almost on top of each other. And it's disgusting. And I can't stand it. I hate it. I do eat meat, but I try to look for the grass fed and finished, meat that has been regeneratively raised, where these are just cattle grazing out in the wide open. Like I saw when I was last year, I went to Europe, and they were literally running all over the fields. And I never saw one animal corralled in a confined operation like we have here in the US, sadly. And I think eventually I hope, outgrow that, so to speak, in the sense that people will start voting with their dollars, and they won't buy the non-grass fed and finished. They won't buy the antibiotic, treated or hormone treated beef anymore. And so the ranchers will just have to change their practices, because nobody's going to buy their beef anymore. So to get back to your point, antibiotics actually are obesogenic for the cow, right? And rightly so. They want to fatten them up for market, but they also have been shown to be obesogenic in us. So if we eat the meat that was exposed to antibiotics, not only will it mess with our microbiota, but will also potentially cause us to get fat. So it's a double whammy, and it's not good for us. In the same way that the crops that are grown with pesticides, you can envision that those are like antibiotics for the microbiota, the microbiome of these crops, and they adversely affect them. And then when we eat them, we get adversely affected as well. And we are only starting now to just, it's literally tip of the iceberg kind of stuff, identify all the potential risks that come from both pesticide-laden foods, the most common of which, of course, is glyphosate, but there are many others out there, and how they are wrecking not only our gut flora, our microbiota, but they are adversely affecting our health. And we're literally just starting to see the ramifications of this. So if you can, definitely try to avoid any kind of pesticide-laden foods, as well as antibiotic-treated meat, hormone-treated meat, all those sorts of things. You're going to be better off if you can get the non-antibiotic, the non-hormone treated, the grass-fed and finished, the pasture raised. Basically the way I look at this, Rob, how did our ancestors do it 200, 300, 500 years ago? Did they ever keep animals corralled in little tiny pens on top of each other and feed them antibiotics and hormones? Of course not. So why should we eat, food products that have been treated that way now, whether it be with pesticides, with our crops, or with protein products that have been treated this way? I mean, it's just not the way that it used to be done. And back in the day, we were way healthier. Yes, we may die of an infectious disease because we didn't have the occasional antibiotic that we really needed, but treating our food with antibiotics is not the answer.
Doc, I wanted to go into a point you spoke about with the olive oil and how it is healthy. There is a problem with these oils, olive oil, avocado, even coconut, that they stay on the shelves for extreme long periods of time. As far as the olive oil and the avocado, if they're not in climate control areas, if they're hitting the light, these oils go rancid. So how do we as a consumer make sure that we're buying quality olive oil and avocado oil, coconut oil, and making sure that they're not just sitting on the shelves for long life periods, and then obviously the light is ruining them and all these other
Yeah.
conditions too?
Yeah, no, very important point. And firstly, any quality olive oil, for example, even out of avocado oil, should come in a dark glass container. If it's in a clear glass, like my glass here, this is not what you want to buy. You want to buy olive oil, avocado oil. You want to buy it in a dark glass container, because the light, prolonged light exposure, will make it rancid. And if you think about it, it sort of makes sense, because these oils are not highly processed to the point where they don't appear rancid. Like if you buy an olive oil and it's been sitting around and you just happen to miss reading the expiration date, for example, and it was expired, and you open the thing up and you sniff it, you're like, this doesn't smell right. It's fairly obvious. What's sad is that the vegetable oil that also is rancid doesn't have that smell. It doesn't kick you off to think, oh, this something's wrong with this, because it was bleached, it was deodorized, it was treated with high heat, high pressure, all of these things. And so you can no longer recognize the fact that they literally sell all of those vegetable oil products out there, from safflower, sunflower, canola, rice bran oil, soybean oil. All this stuff is sold rancid. Now, the olive oil, it may not be sold rancid, but it can become rancid if it is not stored in a cool temperature environment. I know this very well living in Hawaii. I actually have a climate controlled area. It's kind of like a wine, refrigerator kind of thing that many people have. I use it for my oils, because over there it's just too warm. Like it's 78 degrees inside my house year round, basically. And so these oils go rancid pretty quick. So I have temperature controlled place where I store my oils, like the olive oil, the avocado, the coconut oil. And the cool thing, Rob, is you can sniff it out. Those oils, you can actually tell when they're rancid. Vegetable oil, all bets are off. If it's canola oil, vegetable oil, corn oil, any of these others, you can't even tell if it's rancid. In fact, I would say even when you first buy those oils, they are already rancid. And I don't think I'm stepping out on a limb here. That's actually been looked at and shown, but those oils are actually sold rancid. Whereas olive oil, avocado, coconut, typically you hope that they've been climate controlled throughout the process of transport, storage, putting on the shelf, all of those things. But one of the simple things is don't buy them in a clear colored glass. You want to buy them in the dark glass, because that protects them from that light exposure. You hoping that also wherever you buy them, it's in a climate controlled area. Most grocery stores are very air conditioned, as most of us realize when we step into them. But, it's hard to know all of where they have been prior to when you see them
Right.
on a shelf. But do your best. Try to look at the expiration date. Try to look at the labels. There's actually a whole certification process specifically with olive oil that you can look into. I don't really have time to go into it, but it's basically, you got to be cautious, because if it says olive oil, you just have to read the whole labeling, because sometimes they'll incorporate the seed oils to basically mix in, adulterate it to make it less potent and increase your consumption of seed oils, because it's just cheaper. They'll call it olive oil, but if you go to the label, it'll say 30% olive oil and then, whatever, 70% sunflower, safflower, soybean. And I think it's really dishonest, and I don't think they
Right.
should do that. But for some reason, they're allowed to do that. They call it olive oil. It's actually not. You got to read the whole label. So be smart. Read the label at the supermarket. Make sure it's in a dark glass container. There's a whole hierarchy of classification for olive oil, especially, and there's certain varieties that come from Italy that are the most trusted. And I don't have any relationship with any of them, but you can
Yeah.
easily find that if you want to know more. But basically, dark glass. And these, fortunately, you can sniff it out, sadly, once you purchased it. But if you purchase it and it's already smelling bad, I'm sure your grocer will take it back. Most of them are pretty good about that.
Sorry, I'm muted. I just want to get into this because before we move on to the next question, but this is very important too. I don't know if we really need to touch on this, but when you are cooking, whether it's leafy greens or, vegetables in general, make sure you're not using one of these non-stick pans, because all the junk that's in these pans is really toxic. So you might think you're eating good stuff, but when they're in that pan and they're mixing with whatever the heck they're mixing with, and that's going in your body, it's not helpful for you. So just make
Yeah,
sure you're
yeah.
not cooking in these pans. I don't know if you
The
want to
ones that I would
touch on that.
recommend are stainless. Yeah, stainless steel or ceramic is best. Anything that has a Teflon coating. I
No.
mean, over time, like 20 years ago, this is what I always bought, because that's what just we didn't know about this stuff. It just wasn't common knowledge that these things were freaking carcinogenic. I mean, they were literally cancer causing. And when you think about it, you look at these Teflon coatings, after a couple of years, they're peeling off. And where do you think they peeled off to? They peeled off to your food. You ate some of that stuff. And so it does matter. So stick with ceramic is safer, stainless steel. I usually use either of those. You want to stay away from anything that has a Teflon coating. And with respect to the cooking part, really important to choose an oil that is capable of being heated. Number one, olive oil, for example, as amazing as it is better as a dressing. So make your own salad dressing with olive oil. I personally rarely cook with olive oil because it has a lower smoke point. And so you really don't want to raise it to high temperatures. And this actually goes for almost anything you cook. You really don't want to cook things on high temperatures. Like the broiling, you should pretty much almost never broil anything, because when you heat something up that hot, especially if there's any oil there, the
Mhm.
likelihood of it creating downstream carcinogenic chemicals is very high. This goes for barbecue. I love to barbecue, but you know what I use, Rob, is I only use the lowest heat setting, and I just cook it for longer. Instead of
Yeah.
grilling my steak for 10 minutes, I cook it on the lowest heat, and I grill it for like 35, 40 minutes. It's like a slow cook. When you slow cook, you're much less likely to create these potential carcinogens. And it's even more likely that you can create them if you're using oil at high heat, which means all of that
Mhm.
yummy stuff from the fast food restaurant, right? It's in the fryer, it's super high heat, quick, a super short period of time. And those oils that they're using, 100% guarantee it's the worst possible vegetable oil. So sadly, fried foods are pretty much out, but you can swap it out for an air fryer. I actually find that the air fryer does quite a good job with that kind of crispy, taste that we all kind of crave and like. You salt it, it's crispy and what have you. You can do it on the air fryer, but you want to avoid frying almost anything because of that high heat scenario that causes these hydrocarbons that are cancer promoting. So not only you want to use the stainless steel or the ceramic cookware, you don't want to use Teflon coated stuff, the non-stick that seems to be so convenient. Like
Yeah.
avoid it.
Anything that's
Avoid
convenient
it.
is not good. Just stay away
Yeah.
from it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the moral of this story. That's the moral
pretty
of the
much.
podcast. Just stay away from it. I want to go into this because we did touch on last time, as far as the interview goes, that a lot of people have lost faith in healthcare. A lot of people has lost faith also in governmental organizations. Let's go into this. The food pyramid. It's changed many times
Oh
throughout the
my
years.
gosh.
It's changing again. They're putting
It's
things like
changing again.
they're putting things like donuts and all. I don't know how they get away with this stuff that it's healthy and that if you eat meat, it's not healthy and this is not healthy. That used to be healthy. Animal fats. We talked about that in the last podcast.
Yeah.
you know, this is the problem in our country of why people are obese because some people, it's no fault of their own. They think something's healthy. They're listening to the government, they're listening to their medical professionals, and it comes out that these people are either getting paid off or they're lying or they're just oblivious, I guess, to what's going on. I don't know. But, anyways, if you could
Yeah.
just talk about this food pyramid
Yeah.
scenario.
Let's back it up. Let's back it up to the inception of the food pyramid. So when this first came out about 50 years ago, okay, and if we look at what has happened with the trajectory of human health in the last 50 years, just as I've touched on briefly, is it's actually made things worse. We are the most obese nation we have ever been in the history of time over the last 50 years. If you look at the graph, it's gone up literally exponentially with obesity, for example. And this is with the USDA food pyramid guidelines. And sadly, they just came out exactly as you stated, Rob, with a new iteration of the USDA food pyramid. And on that, no joke, I looked at this thing actually last week and it just dumbfounded me. They have, for example, Lucky Charms is healthier than red meat. Like that is the most absurd, ridiculous, does not pass the sniff test. Like it doesn't make any sense at all, but
You
it's
think
right
it's like
there on the
from The
stinking
Onion.
food
They have the,
pyramid.
the, the fake newspaper called The Onion. You think it's
It's
from that, but it's
yeah,
it's factual,
it's
but good.
insane. But if you follow the data and sadly the money, right? Billions and billions of dollars of resources are funneled into the organizations like the FDA, like the Dietitian Association, and these folks that are giving us the nutritional quote unquote guidelines are literally being paid billions and billions of dollars by big food, big pharma. And this is not even a surprise anymore. Most of us actually know this, and we should know it because that's actually been uncovered in the last decade. Yet, this is in Hawaii, we call this no shame. Despite the fact that we all know this, we don't even somehow care. We see it on the food pyramid and we're like, oh, well, the government said that I should eat Lucky Charms over steak and eggs or whatever it is, or something that's a real food single ingredient item. And like I talked about in the first place, they're telling you that Lucky Charms is more healthy. Like
Jams.
doesn't make any
Break.
sense at all. And a lot of it can be sourced to the fact that these organizations, government, organizations, for example, are being primarily funded by big food, big pharma. And I know it's not popular to speak this way, but it's the freaking truth. Like
Yeah,
fact
correct.
is stranger than fiction. Right here, I mean, to see this food pyramid myself that had Lucky Charms on there above red meat was absurd. It makes zero sense. Our ancestors survived off hunting red meat and gathering, and none of them had heart disease, like literally zero. They also didn't have obesity and tooth decay and diabetes and all these things that we have today because we are eating the crap that big food is feeding us, which is the super highly palatable, tastes amazing. Like you mentioned last time, causes the dopamine rush in our heads that are like, oh, eat more, eat more, eat more. They're feeding us this stuff that is literally toxic to our bodies. And yet they're saying on the food pyramid, it's healthy. It's absurd. Fact is stranger than fiction. You can't make this crap up. It's amazing.
Dr. Thomas Hemingway. It's thomas.hemingway.com to check more about him, to get the book there. Also, his podcast, Unshakable Health with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. And then obviously the book is Preventable. 5 Powerful Practices to Avoid Disease and Build Unshakable Health. Doc, thanks so much for coming on. I look forward to our next conversation, maybe in about 2 months from now, to kind of get an update on what the heck is going on in the country, and we'll get more questions from more viewers and look forward to again the next time we chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Rob. It's a great pleasure, and I'm happy to serve. And folks that are on Instagram can also find me there at Dr. Thomas Hemingway, Dr. Thomas Hemingway. I'm fairly active there. I do about a post a day on kind of interesting health topics, and I'm just happy to serve. You can reach out to me on that website, thomashemingway.com, or through the podcast, whatever it may be. I just want to help you live your best life and be as healthy and vital for as long as you want to be. So thanks again, Rob, for having me.